Let's talk about family estrangement, because there are some family relationships that hurt so much or become so unhealthy that contact breaks down completely. And whether that was your choice, their choice, or something you're caught in the middle of, estrangement can leave you grieving, questioning yourself, and trying to make sense of it all. In this episode, we're going to talk about what estrangement means, why it affects your mental health, and how to navigate it so you can protect your peace and begin to heal. So let's talk about how to cope with family estrangement. Hello, I'm Jeremy Godwin, and this is the Let's Talk About Mental Health podcast, full of practical tools for better mental health. In this episode, I want to help you make sense of family estrangement in a way that's honest, grounded, and compassionate. Because this is one of those experiences that can leave you carrying a lot of pain while also feeling like you have to explain yourself to other people. And that can make an already difficult situation feel even heavier. Because when family relationships break down, it's rarely ever about just not speaking. It generally brings up grief, shame, guilt, anger, relief, confusion, self-doubt, and a whole lot of questions about who you are, what happened, and whether or not things could ever be any different. It can affect the way you see yourself, the way you relate to other people, and how safe or unsafe you feel in your own life. And the really difficult part is that there's often no neat script for how to handle estrangement, especially when everyone around you seems to have an opinion about your situation. So maybe you're the one who decided to step away because a relationship was doing too much damage. Maybe someone has cut contact off with you and you're trying to understand what happened. Or maybe you're stuck in the middle of family members who aren't speaking, and now you're having to carry stress that you never asked for. Whatever your version of all this looks like, it can be deeply painful and really isolating, because people tend to project their own ideas about family onto situations that they don't actually understand. I know this from personal experience. I'm estranged from my mother, and if I had $1 for every time someone has said to me, "But she's your mother," well, I would have a lot of dollars by now. So, before we jump into the bigger picture today, I just want to start with one really simple idea that can help you right away if you're hurting, if you're struggling to deal with this stuff. So before you think about anything, before you try to fix anything or explain or decide what happens next, I want you just to recognize the emotional reality of what you're dealing with. Because if you minimize your feelings, or rush them, or shame yourself for feeling what you feel, that's when you just make an already painful situation so much harder. So, we need to name what this actually is. It's not just some family drama, or a rough patch, or one of those things families go through. No, it's a rupture, a loss, a major emotional event. Because when you call estrangement what it is, that's when you stop treating your pain like an overreaction and you can start responding to your emotions with a bit more honesty and a lot more self-care. So if you're in the middle of estrangement right now, just try saying to yourself, this is painful because it matters, and I'm allowed to treat it like something significant. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to then make any big decisions today. All it means is that you stop minimizing the impact and start grounding yourself in reality instead. Because you cannot cope well with something if you keep pretending that it shouldn't affect you this much. Now, the reason why this is such an important starting point and why I'm kicking the episode off with it is that estrangement often comes with mixed emotions. So you may feel sadness and relief at the same time, anger and guilt, clarity and grief. And when those types of feelings clash, a lot of us often start judging ourselves instead of supporting ourselves. But mixed emotions make sense because you're human and this is complicated. Our family relationships are, generally speaking, the most intimate that we will ever have aside from any kind of romantic or partner connection. And so it's important to remember this. Even if the relationship was unhealthy, loss is still loss. We're going to build on that idea as we go today. But the thing is that once you stop minimizing the way you feel about the situation, that's when it becomes much easier to understand why it affects your mental health the way it does, and it's what actually helps you to move through it. So let's start doing that by talking about what is family estrangement. So in really simple terms, family estrangement means a breakdown in a family relationship that leads to little or no contact. It could either be temporarily or for a long time, or even indefinitely. Now, sometimes that happens because one person makes a clear decision to step away. Other times, it happens more gradually. Distance and silence or avoidance or repeated conflict creep in and eventually things reach a breaking point. And sometimes it isn't a direct split between two people at all, but a wider family rupture where you end up caught in the middle of other people's conflict. What matters here is that estrangement is not about just not getting along. It's not about needing a bit of space after an argument. It's a significant relationship rupture with consequences that are emotional and practical, and often identity-focused as well. Because our family relationships tend to carry a lot of meaning for us. They're tied up with our sense of belonging, our history, loyalty, roles, expectations, and the story you tell yourself about where you come from and where you fit in. And so when one of those relationships breaks down, it can affect far more than just who you do or don't speak to. This is also where a lot of people tend to get stuck because they start trying to force the idea of dealing with estrangement into simple categories like right or wrong, justified or unjustified, fixable or unforgivable. But real life is usually far, far messier than that. You might have chosen distance because the relationship was doing real harm, and you still feel grief about it. You might have been cut off by someone and still not fully understand why. You might feel relief that the chaos has stopped, while also mourning the loss of what you wish that relationship could have been. And just to clarify, when I say family here, that could mean your relatives. It could also mean your partner or spouse, especially if you're dealing with something like a separation or divorce. And it also applies to estrangement within your chosen family, as in your closest relationships outside of your relatives. Because those people that we choose to connect with deeply, when we lose a connection and that sense of belonging with them, it can really hit us just as deep, maybe even deeper for some of us. Whatever it looks and feels like for you, family estrangement can generally feel like grief, confusion, and identity shock all rolled up into one. And to understand that better, we need to talk about why family estrangement affects your mental health. All right, so let's talk about why this is about far more than just whether or not you're in contact with someone. Estrangement isn't just about losing touch or losing contact with the person. It's about losing a relationship, losing a role, and sometimes losing a part of the story you thought your life was supposed to have. And that can be incredibly destabilizing. It can bring up all of those complicated emotions I named earlier and more: grief, shame, anger, guilt, confusion, relief, self-doubt. And you can even get this kind of like strange emotional whiplash where you go from feeling clear one day to completely a mess the next, or even during the day. Part of what makes all this so tough is that family relationships are rarely ever just about the present moment. They carry history, our old wounds, our old hopes, old patterns, often a huge amount of emotional weight that goes right back to our childhood. So when a family relationship breaks down, it can hit your nervous system like both a loss and a threat at the same time. You are not dealing with just sadness here. You may also be dealing with things like fear, hypervigilance, second guessing, and that constant background question of, did I do the right thing? Or why wasn't I enough to be chosen? And then there's the shame piece, which can be utterly brutal, right? Because family estrangement is one of those things that other people like to, love to oversimplify. They'll say things to you like, but they're your family, or life's too short, or you only get one family, as if that somehow resolves years of pain, emotional complexity, or harm. It doesn't. Those responses can make you feel judged, misunderstood, or like you have to be pressured into performing some version of family loyalty that comes at the expense of your own well-being. But the truth is that sometimes protecting your peace means disappointing people who don't have to live with the consequences of your relationship choices. It's your life, not theirs. Estrangement also affects your sense of identity. So if you've always seen yourself in a particular role, as a son, a daughter, a sibling, a niece, a nephew, or the person who keeps everyone together, then estrangement can create a really significant rupture in how you see yourself and your role in the family. You may start questioning your place, your choices, or even your worth. And if you happen to be caught in the middle of other people's estrangement, that pressure can be just as exhausting because you're often expected to manage tension that was never yours to deal with in the first place. Estrangement is one of the hardest things you're ever going to have to deal with in your family relationships because estrangement is grief with no script. And I'm going to walk you through some practical ways to deal with family estrangement right after this quick break. And welcome back. So now let's get into the how-to part of this episode and let's talk about how to deal with family estrangement. This is a complicated topic and I am not going to pretend that one episode can cover every angle, every nuance. But as someone who has dealt with family estrangement personally, and as a counselor who's also supported others through it, I want to share what I've learned about being on both sides of it, about handling the guilt, the grief, the should I reach out thoughts, and the practical reality of living with this over time. We're going to talk about some shorter term things you can do, and then we'll move into the longer term work. As always, you'll find these listed in the transcript at ltamh.com/episodes. That's linked in the description. Okay, first, stabilize yourself before you do anything. And this builds on what I said at the start of the episode about naming the rupture honestly instead of minimizing it. If a relationship has broken down to the point of estrangement, then something significant has happened, and your emotional response deserves to be taken seriously before you rush yourself into having to figure out what your next steps will be. So stabilize yourself before you do anything, before you think about contact or explaining or reacting, because one of the biggest traps in estrangement is acting from the peak of emotion. That might look like having an urge to send a long message at 11:30 at night, or reaching out because guilt's hitting you like a truck, or defending yourself to every relative who suddenly has thoughts on the matter, or trying to fix something before you've even worked out what you actually feel, right? And so this is why you need to slow down. Before you do anything, ask yourself, am I doing this because it's genuinely right for me? Or because I'm reacting emotionally and trying to make the discomfort stop? Because those are very different reasons. You need to feel what you need to feel before you can begin to heal. Next, separate your feelings from other people's opinions. So I'm not sure if you've noticed lately, but everybody seems to have an opinion on everything these days, and most of them are noise. But the fact is that these types of situations can and will attract commentary. People project their perspectives. They moralize, they simplify, they oversimplify. They give you lines like, "But she's your mother," as though they've just somehow solved decades of emotional complexity and abuse for you in one sentence. They have not. Your job is not to absorb everyone else's family values and opinions, or to call it wisdom. Your job is to get clear about what you feel, what you know, and what actually supports your well-being. Other people can have their opinions, but that does not mean they get a vote in your life. Okay, next, focus on what works for you. Decide what contact, if any, is actually safe and sustainable for you. Not what would be ideal, not what you should do, not what would make everyone else comfortable. What is actually manageable for you? Now, for some people, that will mean no contact. For others, it might mean very limited contact. Maybe it's only in writing or only around certain issues, or only with very clear boundaries. And if you're the one who is being cut off, it may mean deciding how many times you're realistically going to reach out, if at all, and what your limit is before you stop reopening the wound over and over again. Because there's a real difference between leaving the door unlocked versus standing there all day hoping that someone walks through that door. And if you're still in that sort of messy in-between stage where contact hasn't fully broken down, but your limits keep collapsing, go and check out episode 312, Why Your Family Boundaries Don't Stick. Plus, next week, I'm going to be talking about how to deal with toxic family members, so keep an eye out for that. Hit follow or subscribe so you don't miss that episode. All right, next, prepare for triggers. Moments like anniversaries, holidays, and family events can and probably will hit you like a ton of bricks, even when you think you're coping reasonably well. And it can even be years later. Birthdays, Mother's Day, Father's Day, Christmas, weddings, funerals, random family updates from other people. Even seeing everyone else post their perfect family photos online, like they're auditioning for a catalogue or the John Lewis Christmas ad. If you're in the UK, you know what I'm talking about. So do not wait until those moments arrive and then act surprised that they hurt. They're going to hurt. Plan for them. Ask yourself, what am I likely to feel? What support will I need? What am I saying yes to? What am I saying no to? And what will help me get through the day without abandoning myself? It's taken me a good few years to figure out how to navigate days like my birthday so that I don't just spend it curled up in a ball waiting for it to be over, which I did for a good couple of years. These sorts of events often carry a lot of family history and meaning and routines. And so you need to be proactive about how you approach them and show yourself the kindness that you need in order to get through them. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some of the longer term things that really make a difference when it comes to navigating family estrangement. First, build your own support system. Because yes, you probably can get through it on your own if you try hard enough, but why would you do that to yourself? We all need support. We all need kindness and compassion from other people. So, build your own support network and lean on them. That might include trusted friends, a partner, a therapist or counselor, a support group, or the chosen family you've built over time. Next, grieve the relationship honestly. Regardless of the actual kind of relationship that you had or didn't have, there's a whole grief process here, right? Because estrangement is not just grief for what was. It's often grief for what never really was, but what you still needed and wanted. The loving parent, the safe, supportive sibling, the loving aunt, the family who showed up properly, the version of home that maybe existed more in your hope than in your reality. That kind of grief can be really hard to name, but naming it matters. And if you don't let yourself identify it and grieve it, you can end up stuck in loops of fantasy, resentment, or self-blame. Because grief is a necessary part of healing. And if a big part of your pain is that sense of unfinished business, unanswered questions, or not getting the ending that you wanted, which, let's be honest, goes hand in hand with estrangement quite often, check out episode 324 about finding closure when they won't forgive you. It's linked in the description. Next, rebuild your identity beyond the family role you were stuck in. We all have a role in our families, so if your role was the fixer or the peacekeeper, the black sheep, maybe the scapegoat, the golden child, the reliable one, the one who always reached out first or who kept everyone together, whatever, estrangement can leave you asking, okay, well, who am I now? And that is not a small question. So start paying attention to who you are outside your family system. What matters to you? What kind of relationships feel healthy? What values do you want to live by? What kind of life feels more peaceful, more honest, and more sustainable? Because healing is not only about making sense of what ended, it's also about building something healthier in its place. Next, leave space for change without putting your life on hold. Reconciliation might happen, and it might not. Contact might resume, and it might not. People can grow, but not everybody does, and not every relationship can or should be restored. Sometimes you just can't unknow what you now know. So, the goal is not to force certainty where there is none. The goal is to live your life in a way that doesn't depend on one future outcome in order for you to be okay. If things change someday, you can deal with that then. But in the meantime, your peace, your healing, and your life matter now. And just before I wrap up, I also want to say something briefly for the different positions that people may be in here. If you're the one who stepped away, that doesn't automatically mean that you feel free and fine. You very likely will still feel grief, guilt, and doubt. If you're the one who's been cut off, the pain can be especially sharp because often there's confusion, helplessness, and no sense of closure. And if you're caught in the middle, remember that it's not your job to become the emotional courier service for a broken family system. You are allowed to step back from dynamics that are draining you, even when you love the people involved. So, whatever situation you're in, choose to show yourself kindness and compassion, because this stuff is incredibly complicated and often incredibly painful. So here's what I want you to take away from this episode. Family estrangement is not a small thing, and it's not something that you just get over because other people think you should. It can bring complicated emotions like grief and shame and confusion and identity pain and a whole lot of emotional exhaustion. But when you stop minimizing what it's doing to you, when you start telling yourself the truth about what really hurts, and when you support yourself with honesty and care, that's when it becomes easier to protect your peace and begin healing. So here's a question for you to consider. What part of this situation do you most need to give yourself more compassion around? Let me know on Spotify or YouTube and let's talk about it. Or you can leave a comment at the end of the transcript. Because when you boil it all down, estrangement hurts. But pretending it doesn't will only keep you feeling stuck for longer. Each week I like to finish up by sharing a quote about the topic, and I encourage you to take a few moments to really reflect on it and consider what it means to you. This week's quote is by an unknown author, and it is, "If your family doesn't treat you the right way, make sure you do." Let me repeat that. If your family doesn't treat you the right way, make sure you do. All right, that's it for this week. For more straightforward tips, grab a copy of my book, Life Advice That Doesn't Suck. It's linked in the description. If you'd like to support my work, you can find out more about my Patreon at ltamh.com. And if you found this episode helpful, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast platform because it really does help other people discover the show. Thank you very much for joining me today. Look after yourself and make a conscious effort to share positivity and kindness out into the world because you get back what you put out. Take care and talk to you next time. Join me next week when I talk about how to deal with toxic family members. And check out episode 312 about why your family boundaries don't stick. It's linked in the description. Let's Talk About Mental Health is an independent program. Discover more at ltamh.com.